It will be a summer of no stress for Illinois state lawmakers, unless you consider the fact they're running for re-election. That's a different level of stress altogether. However, the main thing I'm talking about is that they can focus on their campaigns without a budget stalemate looming over their heads. Democrats and Republicans adopted a budget by the end of the legislative session, and Governor Bruce Rauner quickly signed it into law. That's a first during the Rauner administration. There were plenty of bipartisan cheers at the time. Some budget highlights: a $38.5 billion spending plan doesn't change the income tax rate. It provides $350 million in new money for public schools. That satisfies most lawmakers. Among the biggest criticisms, it doesn't address the state's backlog of bills that total more than $6.5 billion, a carryover from the previous budget failures, and the state's pension liability is still a mess. You could say it was the path of least resistance to get a deal done in Springfield, perhaps a necessity this election year. Two men in the middle of it join us for a conversation this morning: Republican State Senator Neil Anderson and Democratic State Representative Mike Halpin. Welcome back to the program, both of you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thanks, Jim.
So it took a long time to adopt this budget, even though you got it done in time and went to the very end. And it took effect without solving some of the state's most pressing issues. The budget deals with, I guess, the bare necessities. Was it a matter of just taking what you can get? What are the biggest accomplishments and disappointments for each of you? Senator?
Well, I think this budget was a true compromise, and yeah, you're right. I mean, this is not the end-all be-all. This is not going to fix Illinois' financial woes, but this is by far a step in the right direction, to say the least. We're not deficit spending. We're spending what we have for the first time in 16 years. So we need to use this as a launch pad going forward to fixing Illinois.
Now, would you say probably your biggest accomplishment that you're not running deficit spending? What about biggest disappointment for you?
In this budget?
Yeah, or overall through the session, even if you want to go that
well,
far.
I think the session was overall, it was good. It was a different feel this year. There was a lot of talk, a lot more talk amongst rank and file members on both sides of the aisle, and there was definitely a feeling of we need to get something done and come to a compromise. This was for sure a compromise. There was some that wanted more spending and a tax increase. There's some that wanted more cuts and less spending to pay off our backlog, and we worked to the middle.
Representative Halpin, you agree by and large, I take it? Was it just taking what you can get?
Yeah, well, it was a good compromise, and it was really just deciding what our priorities were going to be. And the $350 million extra for K through 12 is a commitment that we honored. We reversed some of the cuts to higher education from last year, reversed some of the local government cuts from last year, and put ourselves on a more solid footing. And really the biggest benefit to this budget is that businesses and individuals can continue to plan and have the certainty of knowing what the playing field looks like, what the rules are.
Any disappointments for you?
You know, I would have always loved to do more for higher education. That was the biggest drawback in last year's budget, but we were able to get a little bit back. It would be nice to be able to do a little bit more, but hopefully with the 4-year MAP grant that's included in this, allows students to have more certainty for those 4 years. We're going to get more students involved in the system, and we'll be able to bring back some of what we lost over the past 3 years.
How come we didn't see more to address the pension liability, and what's the plan for the bill backlog as well?
Well, there are certain pension provisions in there. We're going to have voluntary buyouts, things like that, to help provide some savings. I think the long-term goal is, again, to prioritize payments, make sure they're paid on time, maintain our credit rating, until we get to the point where Tier 2 really starts to kick in on those pensions.
Senator?
I would agree. I mean, there's about $450 million in savings to the unfunded pension liability within this, with the voluntary buyout program. And
is that a drop in the bucket, though, compared to what we need for the pensions?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
But you know, it's the old adage: how do you eat an elephant? It's one bite at a time. And you know, making these little changes, and again, it's a step in the right direction.
What do you think is left over to pick up next session? Assuming you're both reelected, I'm not going to go with that. I mean, you have a lot of work before you get there, but your biggest goals for next year, we have a little bit of time here.
So I think now that we've come to a true compromise, we're not deficit spending. Now we need to focus on some reforms. We need to make sure that we're focused on real property tax relief for citizens, which we did address that somewhat in this budget with more funding towards education. That's definitely going to take some pressure off, and we need to make it better for businesses, not only to want to stay here, but to attract them.
You agree?
Well, I think for me the biggest priority is to make sure that bad actors in the corporate sector are giving back taxpayer incentives that we give them when they then take jobs out of state or overseas. And then in contrast, we also need to encourage business with good actors with tax incentives such as the historic tax credit that we passed. And we need to expand that program and make sure it's as effective as possible for this area.
We have more ground to cover with Illinois State Senator Neil Anderson and State Representative Mike Halpin. Coming up, airport omission. A plan to strengthen the Quad City International Airport stalled in Springfield. What chances it has next year? For the record.